The fluorescent glare of Narita International Airport at noon possesses a specific exhausting weight. It presses down on the eyelids, turning the recycled air into a thick soup of ozone, floor wax, and the quiet desperation of thousands of people trying to leave. A relentless grind of polyurethane wheels over polished terrazzo sets the baseline rhythm. I stood perfectly still, letting the dull ache in my lower back settle, my passport dampening against the palm of my hand. The line for the single daily Hawaiian Airlines flight to Honolulu, my layover before Washington, coiled endlessly through Terminal 2 like a dying snake. For 3 weeks, I had moved through the meticulous, quiet respect of Tokyo. I had learned to soften my voice, to bow my head, to exist within a culture that prioritized the harmony of the collective over the abrasive demands of the individual. Now, corralled between velvet ropes, that peace was fraying. The queue was a purgatory of shifting weight and heavy sighs. Every few minutes, a new traveler would crest the escalator, spot the labyrinth of luggage, and let their shoulders drop in defeat before dragging their bags to the very back. It was an unspoken social contract, a shared suffering. You pay your toll in time. Then the air shifted. It wasn't a sound at first, but a disruption in the peripheral rhythm of the crowd. A man, early 20s, pushed through the outer perimeter of the velvet ropes. He wore a pristine track jacket, zippered precisely to the collarbone, and emitted a vapor trail of synthetic musk and stale nicotine. This was Goran. He did not look at the back of the line. He looked at the middle. He moved with a loose-limbed, predatory confidence, the kind of manufactured swagger born from late nights in dimly lit clubs where volume equals authority. He drifted past 30 exhausted people, his eyes scanning the herd for a weak point, a fracture in the armor of the queue. He found his target right behind me. The man standing at my back was older, maybe mid-50s, wearing a crumpled linen shirt that had seen better time zones. Call him Soren. Soren was traveling alone, leaning heavily on the handle of a massive, scuffed aluminum suitcase, staring blankly at the space between my shoulder blades. Goran slid into the empty foot of space beside Soren, leaning in close enough to violate basic geometry. He didn't ask to cut. He bypassed the request entirely, initiating a maneuver of forced intimacy. "Crazy, right?" Goran murmured, aiming a conspiratorial smirk at Soren. "They treat us like cattle. You flying to the islands too?" Soren blinked, pulling his attention away from the middle distance. He looked at Goran, then at the vast sea of people behind them. "I am in the line," Soren said, his voice carrying the thick, gravelly cadence of a weary European. It was not an invitation to converse. It was a statement of geography. Yeah, we are all in the line," Goran chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. He shifted his weight, subtly placing his left sneaker entirely inside the boundary of the rope, claiming the territory. "I'm just saying it's a mess. Good thing we're up here, good thing we look out for each other, my friend." He clapped a heavy hand on Soren's shoulder. It was a calculated touch disguised as camaraderie, but the fingers dug in just a fraction too hard. The subtext was blindingly clear. "I am taking this spot, and you are going to let me." The internal friction caught in my throat. I had spent 21 days decompressing, washing away the hypervigilant defensive posture required to navigate American cities. I wanted nothing more than to put in my noise-canceling headphones, stare at the tarmac, and coast home. But the entitlement radiating from the track-jacketed interloper was a chemical spill in a clean room. Soren did not flinch. He simply looked down at the hand on his shoulder, then back up to Goran's face. "I am not your friend," Soren said, his tone dropping an octave, stripping away any pretense of politeness. "The back of the line is by the escalators. You need to walk." Goran's smirk froze. The cheap veneer of charm cracked, revealing the brittle, furious entitlement beneath. The transition was instantaneous. He didn't apologize, he didn't retreat. He leaned closer, the muscles in his jaw twitching as he encroached on Soren's personal space. "Excuse me," Goran hissed, the volume low but jagged. "You want to tell me what to do, old man? Why don't you mind your own business?" "You are making it my business," Soren replied, his grip tightening on the handle of his suitcase. "Move. Fuck off." Goran spat the words, puffing his chest out, a biological display of aggression designed to intimidate, to force submission through the sheer threat of escalation. "What are you gonna do about it? Huh, you gonna make me move?" The pulse in my carotid artery began a slow, heavy thud. The sheer absurdity of it, the aggressive posturing, the playground bullying in the middle of one of the most polite societies on Earth was suffocating. The surrounding passengers had gone completely still. Dozens of eyes were locked on the confrontation, a collective holding of breath. Nobody wanted violence, but nobody was going to let this stand. I rotated on my heel. I didn't say a word at first. I just turned and let my physical presence alter the topography of the space. At 6'4", I had a distinct vantage point. I looked down at the top of Goran's meticulously gelled hair. As I squared my shoulders, placing myself partially between him and Soren, Goran's chest-puffing routine suddenly lost its structural integrity. He had built his intimidation on the assumption of a soft target. He had not factored in the architecture of the person standing directly in front of his chosen victim. Goran snapped his head up to look at me. The bravado flickered in his eyes, replaced for a microsecond by the primal realization of a physical disadvantage. "He told you to go to the back," I said. I kept my voice flat, devoid of anger, devoid of any emotion he could latch onto and use as fuel. It was the vocal equivalent of a concrete wall. "You need to leave. You want a problem too," Goran deflected, trying to redirect his hostility toward me, but his voice lacked the gravel it had a moment ago. He tried to maintain the puffed chest, but having to angle his chin upward to maintain eye contact ruined the effect. "There's no problem," I said, keeping my hands visible, resting casually on the top of my carry-on. "You're just in the wrong place. The line starts back there." He sneered, a desperate attempt to save face. He was trapped in the prison of his own ego. To walk away now was to admit defeat, to acknowledge that his strategy of bullying the world into submission had failed. So he doubled down. He planted his feet, crossed his arms, and stared straight ahead at the check-in counter, pretending we no longer existed. "I'm not moving," he muttered. "Touch me. See what happens." It was a pathetic, dangerous trap. If I shoved him, I was the aggressor. If Soren struck him, we would be the ones answering to Japanese airport security. Goran was banking on the fact that decent people have too much to lose, but decent people also have patience. We didn't touch him. We didn't speak to him again. Soren and I simply stood there, a human barricade, holding the tension in the air like a stretched piano wire. The line inched forward. Goran shuffled with us, staring a hole into the back of the person in front of me, sweating slightly beneath his track jacket. The silence from the surrounding passengers was deafening. It wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of a jury that had already reached a verdict. 5 minutes later, a Hawaiian Airlines gate agent walked down the outside of the ropes. Her name badge read Chio. She carried a clipboard and wore a neatly pressed uniform adorned with a subtle hibiscus pattern. She moved with the brisk, hyper-competent energy of someone who manages logistical nightmares for a living. I caught her eye and raised a hand. She approached, her expression a mask of professional curiosity. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice calm and polite. "This gentleman just walked up and pushed his way into the middle of the line. He's been asked to go to the back and he became aggressive." Goran immediately pivoted, a sycophantic smile plastered across his face. "No, no, miss, these guys are crazy. I was just talking to my friend here." "He is not my friend," Soren interjected, his voice carrying the weight of absolute truth. "He threatened me. He shoved his way in." Chio looked at Goran, then at Soren, then up at me. Before Goran could launch into another defensive lie, a woman standing in the adjacent switchback of the line, a mother holding a toddler against her hip, spoke up. "He cut," she said simply. "Yeah, he just walked right in," said a college student standing behind Soren. "Told the guy to fuck off," murmured a businessman 2 spots back. It was a cascade of quiet, damning testimony. The collective had spoken. Goran looked around, his eyes darting from face to face, realizing for the first time that his reality distortion field had completely collapsed. There were no shadows here to hide in, no loud music to drown out his actions. There was only the sterile light of the terminal and the unwavering stares of people who were entirely exhausted by his existence. Chio did not raise her voice. She did not express anger. She simply looked at her clipboard, made a tiny notation with a silver pen, and then looked at Goran. "Sir," Chio said, her tone carrying the terrifying, immovable force of corporate bureaucracy, "I need you to step out of the line." "I have a flight," Goran protested, his voice cracking, the false bravado evaporating into genuine panic. "I've been waiting." "You will not be taking this flight," Chio said, pointing her pen toward the distant concourse doors. "We do not tolerate aggressive behavior toward our passengers. You will need to step out of the line, or I will call airport police to escort you off the property." The blood drained from Goran's face. He looked at the pen pointing toward the exit. He looked at me, hoping for a fight, hoping for an excuse to explode, but I just stared back at him with the same flat, unyielding expression. He was entirely impotent. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The world, for once, was not bending to his intimidation. He grabbed his duffel bag from the floor, his knuckles white. He let out a string of muttered curses, venomous but hollow, and ducked under the velvet rope. He didn't look back. We watched him walk away, his posture rigid, swallowed up by the sprawling mass of the terminal until he was just a speck of colored fabric against the gray terrazzo. "Thank you for your patience," Chio said to the crowd, offering a slight, polite bow before continuing her patrol down the line. Soren looked at me, let out a long, ragged exhale, and offered a tight nod. I nodded back. No other words were necessary. The line shifted forward, the squeak of polyurethane wheels resuming their steady, monotonous grind. 4 hours later, I was 30,000 feet over the Pacific Ocean. The cabin of the aircraft was dim, filled with the low hum of the engines and the rhythmic breathing of sleeping passengers. I rested my forehead against the cold acrylic of the window, watching the moonlight reflect off an endless expanse of clouds. I found myself thinking about Goran. It was the only Hawaiian Airlines flight of the day. He was still down there, somewhere in the neon sprawl of Tokyo, his itinerary shattered, his wallet inevitably lighter from the cost of a rebooked ticket and another night in a hotel. I couldn't fathom the architecture of a mind that operates the way his did. To walk through life viewing every interaction as a dominance test, every shared space as a territory to conquer. I wondered what it felt like to be him in the moments after he walked away. Did he recognize his own fault? Did he feel the sting of shame? Or, more likely, did he retreat into the comforting, delusional narrative of the victim? He probably sat in a terminal bar, nursing a weak drink, fuming about how the world was rigged, how everyone was out to get him, how unfair it all was. It was a profound, suffocating tragedy. He wasn't just a nuisance. He was an architect of his own misery. He had tried to steal 20 minutes of waiting, and in the process, he had exiled himself. As the plane banked gently toward the dawn, I closed my eyes, grateful for the silence, and left him behind in the dark.